Hello everyone, this is Jeeves and welcome to Bittersweet Theory. I wanted to start by saying thank you for watching my video. Now let's get started. Today we are going over two different versions of the Snow White story. First, we'll be going over the original Grimm Brothers fairy tale, then go over the Walt Disney animated film. Using both versions of the story, I'm going to do my best to fill in the gaps. The original story starts off with the Queen, Snow White's mother, looking out a window. She sees the white snow start to fall on the window frame. She pricks her finger on her sewing needle. After seeing the red blood drip on the snow, she says to herself, "Would that I had a child, skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony." When the child was born, the Queen's words came true. She named her daughter Little Snow White. Then, after Snow White was born, she died. The king waited a year, then remarried a beautiful but evil woman. After this point in the story, there is no mention of Snow White's father or what happened to him. The story only focuses on the relationship between the evil queen and Snow White. The story explains that the evil queen had a magic looking glass, without any explanation how it came into her possession. The story then tells that the queen knows how to use the mirror due to the fact that she knew the right words to say. Looking glass, on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all? Disney would later change this line to mirror, mirror on the wall, who is fairest of them all? The looking glass answers the queen by saying, "Thou, O queen, art fairest of all." For years, this was the answer she got until Snow White started to grow up. Once Snow White was older, she became more beautiful than the queen. Again, the queen asked the looking glass the same question. Looking glass on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all? It gave a different answer this time. Thou art then all who are here, Lady Queen. But more beautiful still is Snow White. The evil queen became envious of Snow White to the point she hated her. The queen then called a huntsman and told him, "Take the child away into the forest. I will no longer have her in my sight. Kill her and bring me back her heart as a token." The huntsman obeyed the queen's orders and takes Snow White away from the castle into the woods. He drew his knife and tried to cut out her heart. Snow White began to weep. She then begs for her life. Seeing how beautiful she was, the huntsman took pity on her and tells her to run away. As Snow White runs away, he kills a wild boar, taking the heart to the queen instead. The story then says that Snow White was alone in the forest for the first time in her life and was frightened by everything around her. She ran as fast and as long as she could until she came across a cottage. She goes inside to find everything in the cottage was small. There was a small table with 7 plates, spoons, forks, knives, and mugs. Snow White was so hungry and thirsty, she ate from the plates. Snow White was so hungry, she ate from the plates and drank from the mugs. After eating and drinking, Snow White laid across the 7 beds on the other side of the room. The next morning, Snow White woke up and was frightened by the 7 little men. They kindly asked her what her name was, and she responded, "Snow White." Then they asked her how she found their house. Snow White then explains how her stepmother wanted to kill her, but the huntsman saved her life. After hearing her story, the dwarves told her that if she could cook, clean, and sew for them, that she could stay. In the mornings, they went to the mountains to mine for copper and gold, and in the evenings, they would come back. Each day, the dwarves warned her by telling her, Beware your stepmother. She will soon know that you are here. Be sure to let no one in." By this point in the story, the queen believes that she had eaten Snow White's heart. Thinking that she was most beautiful of all, again she went to the looking glass and asked who was fairest of all. The looking glass answered again, "O queen, thou art fairest of all I see, but over the hills where the 7 dwarfs dwell, Snow White is still alive and well. No one is more fair than she." Due to the fact that the queen knew that the mirror spoke the truth, she knew that the huntsman had betrayed her. Taking matters into her own hands, the queen decided to kill Snow White herself. She painted her face to look like an old woman. The queen then made 3 poisonous objects. First of the objects were stay laces that were used to lace up corsets. Snow White let the queen in, and she laced the poison into her corset. After Snow White fell over dead, the queen said, "Now I am most beautiful," then returned back to the castle. The dwarfs came home later to find that Snow White on the floor. They were shocked by what had happened. After they removed the laces, Snow White began to breathe. They then sat her up, and Snow White told him the story of what happened. The dwarfs told Snow White that the old peddler woman was the evil queen. They also said not to let anyone in when they were not home. The evil queen returns to the looking glass again and gets the same response. This time the queen returns to the cottage and the dwarfs lock the door. The queen returns to the cottage and the dwarfs have locked the door, and Snow White tells her to go away, that she is not allowed to let anyone in. The queen tells her that she can just look. She pulls out the poison comb. Then for some reason Snow White lets the witch in and she combs her hair. The moment the comb touched her hair, the poison took effect. Thinking that Snow White was dead, the queen returned to the castle again. The dwarfs return, seeing Snow White lying dead on the ground, and they knew that it was her stepmother's doing. They looked around and found the poisonous comb. They took it out of her hair, and then Snow White came to life again. She told them what happened. They warned her again not to let her in. The evil queen returned back to the looking glass one last time and got the same answer as before. This time she used an apple to poison Snow White. When the queen returned to the cottage, she had changed her appearance to look like a country woman. Snow White told the woman that she was not allowed to let her in, that the dwarves had forbidden it. The evil queen said that it was all the same to her, that she would throw out the apples she had, but gave one to Snow White. Snow White said no, that she didn't want the apple. The queen replied, "Are you afraid of being poisoned?" Then she suggested that Snow White eat the peel of the apple, and the queen ate the white part. Snow White ate the peel of the apple, but got it stuck in her throat. When the queen fell to the ground, she got it stuck in her throat. When she fell to the ground, the queen returned to the castle to ask the looking glass one more time who was fairest. Finally, she got the response she wanted. When the dwarves returned home, they found Snow White on the ground. This time they lifted her up to see if they could find anything poisonous. They looked in her hair and washed her with water and wine, but couldn't find anything. This time they really believed that Snow White was dead. They were going to bury her, but decided that they couldn't place her in the cold ground due to the fact that she still had pretty red cheeks. They made the coffin out of gold and carved her name into the side of it. The top of it was made out of glass. Snow White laid a long time in the coffin as if she was asleep. They moved the coffin to the mountaintop. The king's son came and saw the coffin. He reads Snow White's name and asks the dwarves for the coffin. They refuse to give it to him. He asked for it as a gift because he cannot go without seeing Snow White. The dwarves took pity on him as they moved the coffin. The apple peel falls out of her mouth. Then Snow White wakes up. First, Snow White is confused on where she is, and then the prince expresses his love for her, then takes her back to the castle to marry her. At their wedding, the evil queen attends, but is forced to wear red-hot iron shoes as a form of torture for what she did to Snow White. She is then forced to dance with the red-hot shoes until she dies. Walt Disney animated film gives a better visual and understanding of the story. After watching the movie again, I had a lot of questions. Where were all the people in the kingdom? What really happened to the king? Why keep Snow White alive? How did the prince know where Snow White was? How did the dwarves know that the queen was evil in the first place? Using the original story and the Walt Disney version, I can answer all of these questions. After the king marries the evil queen, he arranges a marriage between his daughter Snow White and the prince. This is true due to the fact at the beginning of the film, Snow White is singing about the person she loves. We also know that Snow White and the prince have met before. In the Disney fairy tale book, it says, the prince recognized Snow White as a young woman he once loved. This is why at the wishing well, when the prince sees Snow White, she runs away because she is dressed in rags and she fears that he will not recognize her. So he also knows the song that she's singing and sings along with her until she closes the curtains. Hearing about the arranged marriage between Snow White and the prince, the evil queen at some point asked the mirror if the king really loved her. It answered no, giving her motivation to poison him. She poisoned the king and locked him in the dungeon that places a cup of water just out of reach. We know this due to the fact that after the queen turns herself into an old woman, she walks by a skeleton and gets a lot of enjoyment of kicking the bones. Due to the fact that she has killed the king, she has no choice but to keep Snow White alive, so that way she still has claim to the throne. Rumors of what happened to the king must have spread through the kingdom about the queen. To put an end to this, the queen probably poisoned or threatened all the people, causing them to leave. This is why we don't see anyone in the kingdom and why the dwarves know that she is evil. Snow White grows up and becomes more beautiful than the queen. The queen asks the mirror who is fairest of them all. When the mirror answers, it leads her to believe that it was Snow White. The queen calls upon a huntsman and tells him to take Snow White and bring back her heart. At first the huntsman refuses, but the queen then threatens him by saying, "You know your fate if you don't." Yeah, we sure do. He'll end up just like the king. Not wanting that to happen, the huntsman takes Snow White into the field next to the forest where she is picking flowers. Snow White somehow has the ability to talk to small animals and is distracted while the huntsman creeps up behind her with a knife. At the last second, for dramatic impact, Snow White turns around to see him about to kill her. He can't bring himself to do it. He tells her that the evil queen ordered him to kill her because she was jealous of Snow White. She runs away into the forest and is frightened by everything around her, given that this is her first time ever being outside the castle walls. The huntsman kills a wild pig and brings it back to the queen. Being so afraid of her surroundings, Snow White breaks down in the middle of the forest until cute animals come to her aid. She starts talking to them by answering the questions that she can only hear. They lead her to the cottage where she thinks the dwarves are children based on the size of everything in the cottage. Then, using her special powers of talking to animals, she gets them to do most of the chores while she sweeps. At this point, I was convinced that Snow White had more powers in her singing voice than the evil queen had in her whole body. The animals clean the house. Then Snow White takes a nap on three of the dwarves' beds. Next, you are introduced to all the dwarves who are singing about getting rich from digging in the ground. A small clock goes off, and that was their signal to return home. When they got back, they noticed that the whole house was clean. They think that some sort of evil but polite witch had cleaned their house and was making food for them. But given the rumors about the queen, they have every right to be suspicious. Finally, they find Snow White laying in bed. Then she wakes up. All of them bond over her guessing their obvious names. She makes the offer that she will clean, cook, and sew for them if she is allowed to stay. The dwarves are more interested in the fact that she can cook and agree to her staying. Back at the castle, we get the scene where the queen asks the mirror again who is fairest of all. The mirror tells her again that it's Snow White. She calls out the mirror saying that she is dead and shows the box with the heart in it. The mirror tells her that is a pig's heart, and then she realizes that she's been tricked by the huntsman. It then tells her where Snow White and the 7 dwarves are. This is where Disney skips over the poison laces and combs and goes straight to having the queen change her appearance and make a poison apple with magic. The queen offers Snow White the apple. The small birds attack the evil queen. Snow White waves them away. After the queen acts like she needs a drink of water, Snow White invites her in. It is then the evil queen lies to her, saying that it is a magic apple, and if she takes one bite, all her dreams will come true. While this is going on in the forest, the animals run to get the dwarves. Just as the queen thought she was getting away with killing Snow White, she was chased down by the dwarves. They chase her up the mountain where she tries to move a massive boulder, but lightning strikes and she falls to her death. After the dwarves make the coffin out of gold with her name carved onto the side, word spreads about Snow White's death. The dwarves sit there for a year until the prince shows up to kiss Snow White one last time. I'm assuming that the word of her death spreaded throughout the kingdom due to the fact that the dwarves actually removed the glass covering of the coffin just for him to be able to kiss her. He kisses her and she wakes up only to wrap her arms around him. She is now free to leave with him and live happily ever after. I understand why Walt Disney changed this because this is a much nicer ending than watching an evil queen be tortured to death. Alright everyone, thank you so much for listening and watching this video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you can give this video a thumbs up, it would be a great help to the channel. Until next time, cue the music.